Thanks a lot for being here. I almost never give presentations like this, but I'm going to do it now. The first image we'll be seeing is by a French artist. It was produced in 1859. The artist is Jean-François Millet, and anglicized, the title is the Angelus or Angelus. Those of you who are Roman Catholic might have an idea what that's about. So this is called Setzi God in the Practice of Medicine. It would be pointless for me to begin by attempting to approve the existence of God. God's existence can no more be proved or disproved. And the principal purpose of many so-called proofs that have been offered by people like St. Anselm and St. Thomas Aquinas and so forth over the centuries, the purpose of those proofs was not to establish that God exists, but to dramatize the limitations of human apprehension, our ability to understand. To seek proof that God exists is like seeking proof that air, water, and light exist. We can, of course, measure the volume of air, or the weight of water, or the intensity of light, but in doing so, we don't prove that they're real. Instead, we're merely assessing some of their properties. We know they exist not because they can be quantified, but because we experience them directly: air, water, light. We take for granted the existence of many things that lack such properties. In the realm of science, gravity is presumed to be a universal force, yet no one has ever described it in terms of volume, mass, location, or color. Nor can we offer any explanation for how or why gravity is. The same can be said for mathematics. At its best, mathematics is a remarkable, powerful, and beautiful realm of insight. Yet no one can touch a number or a mathematical proof. Some of the conclusions we draw in mathematics appear to be indisputably true as anything we know or hope to know. And yet we are utterly unable to measure any of the numbers. There are ideas without which many of us would find it difficult to live: faith, hope, and love, the existence of which we can't prove. We entrust our lives to people whose deepest convictions we cannot know. We keep building for a tomorrow that could be snatched from us at any moment. For many of us, life would be meaningless if we had no one to care for. The essential question is not whether light or gravity or mathematics or love exist. Of course they exist. To request their dimensions is to fail to understand what they are in the first place. The question is not what do they amount to, or are they here or there or everywhere. The question is instead whether we are sufficiently aware of them. Likewise, once we begin to weigh evidence for and against God's existence, we are lost. The question is not whether God is sufficiently present to us, but whether we are sufficiently present to God. Are we so focused on ourselves that we cannot sense the presence of something greater? Or can we recognize that we are in fact immersed in something greater, unimaginably greater than ourselves? That's Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam. Some of you have perhaps seen it on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. produced in the year 1512. One of the biggest obstacles to an awareness of the divine presence is a false set of expectations regarding what God does. Some suppose the universe is like a giant mechanism set in motion 13.8 billion years ago, and that like any such mechanism, it only had need of something, a prime mover, to set it in motion. This view supposes that we had need of God but once, in the beginning, to get the wheels of the universe turning. Once the divine motion had been imparted, we could dispense with that hypothesis. From that point forward, Newton's laws of motion, or Gibbs' free energy, or the forces of natural selection, have been sufficient to account for each subsequent chapter in the history of creation. I'm not in sympathy with that point of view. In fact, the existence of anything, anywhere, at any moment is no less remarkable than the fact that at some point something emerged from nothing. What prevents everything from simply winking out of existence in the same way it was born? Creation is happening all around us and within us, every moment of every day, sustained by something beyond our power to sense or apprehend. Poets, philosophers, and prophets have employed words such as miracle and wonder to describe the world around us. Miracles are not just contraventions of natural law, violations of natural law, such as the parting of seas or the raising of the dead, but everyday events. Sunrises and sunsets, terrible storms and calm seas, and the birth and death of everything now living, or that has ever lived. We are, in other words, in the midst of miracles, wallowing in wonders. There's nothing less wondrous about the world we inhabit every day, a world of air, water, and light, of rocks, plants, and animals. There's nothing less wondrous about that than the world of wonders recounted in sacred texts. We not only didn't create it, but can't even really understand it. And often the best we can do is simply to behold it. This is painted in the year 1600 by Caravaggio. It's the calling of Saint Matthew. Even more remarkable is the idea that creation is not simply there to be beheld by us, but actually beckoning to us. Reality invites us, calls us, and in some sense wants us to do and become the best of which we're capable. Just as acorns are meant to grow into oak trees, and embryonic squirrels are meant someday to scurry after nuts, so we are meant fully to develop our capacities. We are, in a profound sense, creation's beholders, the wanderers. We do not really know what a squirrel or an oak tree may be aware of, but we find in ourselves the power to marvel. Whether peering through a telescope at the birth and death of distant galaxies, watching through a microscope as cells grow and divide, musing in astonishment at quantum mechanics, we are nothing if not amazed. Just as the oak beckons the acorn and the squirrel the embryo, so the world around us beckons us to see, to hear, and to feel the pulse of creation. Through our science, music, art, and poetry, we are called to know reality. We are far too small, far too fleeting, far too blind and dumb to know reality completely. But more than enough is given us to keep us fully occupied and entranced for numberless lifetimes. In observing and sensing the way of the world, we not only answer our call, but find it. It is a place of nurture where reality is ceaselessly coming into being. And we too are called to come fully into our own being, to observe, and in observing to inquire, and in inquiring to know, and in knowing to love, to become, in other words, as fully human as we possibly can. To be human is first and foremost to recognize that we are not God. To suppose that we have seen it all, that everything we could possibly apprehend has become known to us, and that we have progressed to the point that we can now cast off our divine training wheels and take the wheel of creation, is to deny both our place in nature and our nature itself. Ours is a far more modest, but nonetheless wondrous mission, to grow into the role of human beings as fully and faithfully as we can. Our mission is not to assume a posture of dominance astride the path of creation, but simply to cultivate an awareness of the true Creator in everything around and within us. This was painted by Raphael in the year 1520. It's called The Transfiguration. How can we cultivate an awareness of God's presence? One crucial step is to recognize the circumstances under which God's presence is most likely to be felt. Celtic culture provides us with the metaphor of a thin place. A thin place. A place where the gap between our everyday world and the realm of the eternal seems to be narrowed. For some, a thin place might correspond to a special set of GPS coordinates, such as a waterfall or canyon, or a shrine or a cathedral. For others, a thin place might be an event, like the rising of the sun or the stillness of night under a starry sky. For still others, a thin place might be a human occasion, such as the birth of a baby or the death of a loved one. Thin places are so necessary because we often find ourselves existing in thick ones. It is so easy to fritter away our days, so occupied with worldly concerns at work and at home that the presence of God never dawns on us. Rather than drawing our attention toward the divine, so much of the equipment of our lives seems to conspire to distract us from it. Thin places provide us an opportunity to lose our bearings so that we can find new ones. It is profoundly ironic. But the only way to gain a securer perch is to let go the one we have. And the only way to find ourselves is to lose ourselves. By taking us outside of ourselves, thin places provide us opportunities to sense the divine in a particularly clear and vivid way. If creation itself is beckoning to us, then it is not unreasonable to suppose that God intends not just shrines or sunrises or births to act as thin places, but for the whole world to be a thin place. We need not withdraw from everyday life by taking a vacation or seeking refuge in a retreat center. We need but open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to what is unfolding all around us. It could even be that God intends us to function as co-creators of thin places. Perhaps we, through our own awareness of the divine presence, can help to foster conditions under which we too are most likely to sense it. We can, in a sense, thin the world out, removing the obstacles that stand between God and us, and opening ourselves up to what is most worth attending to. At Sinai, after all, God commanded the Israelites to build an altar at every place where he causes his name to be remembered. An altar is first and foremost a high place, a place where, metaphorically speaking, we are a bit closer to God. More broadly, it is a place where God is made known and the divine presence is felt. An altar is a place of sacrifice, not in the sense of spilling blood, but as a means of making sacred. That's what the word sacrifice means, to make sacred. When we place an offering on an altar, we raise it up and enable ourselves to see the sacred in the profane. Abraham placed his son Isaac on such an altar, giving him to God. Christians do the same, whether at the Eucharist altar or the ultimate altar of the cross, which it represents. Altars may be portable. The Ark of the Covenant, for example, could be carried from place to place and dwelt within a tent. The point is not that we should build an ark, but that we should recognize there are no limits to God's presence. God's presence is not anywhere, but everywhere. It's only thanks to our human limitations that we require means of opening ourselves up to it. The most important religious painting of the 20th century, at least in the Christian tradition, Salvador Dali's. Salvador, by the way, means, well, you can figure out if you're interested. Salvador Dali's Christ of St. John of the Cross, painted in 1951. Human beings, in other words, can serve as the ultimate reminders of God's presence. The most notable example perhaps being Jesus Christ himself. When Jesus wanted to pray, he would often go to a deserted place. In so doing, he reminds us of the importance of silence, of listening, of simply beholding. In part, he may have been freeing himself from distraction, but perhaps he was also focusing his whole being on God. This, then, is what it means to be in God's presence in the practice of medicine. It is not to ask whether God is, or presume to shoehorn the divine into any of our human boxes. Instead, it is to open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts to an ever-present presence, one that in loving calls us to love one another as deeply and well as we possibly can, and to create opportunities for others to do the same. The end. That's a bizarre collection of words to be uttered in a room such as this, a testing center in a 21st century medical school, in the midst of a monument to contemporary biomedical knowledge, namely the library. But so be it. You know, sometimes unusual things happen. They're not all bad. So that's really strange to read a paper in a setting like this, but that's what just happened. And, you know, my hope is that that'll stimulate some reflection or objection or conversation. In fact, it'll be a spirit-crushing blow to me if it doesn't. And that's not a joke. That's dead serious. So the ball is now in your court. Sensing God's presence in the practice of medicine. Nathan.
I'd say for you personally, where are your thin places in a normal workday, if there are any?
So for me personally, what are thin places in a normal workday? For me, this right now is a thin place. I'm not sure, I mean, this sounds bizarre, but I'm not sure I was entirely responsible for the words that were just delivered. And, you know, might be a neurotransmitter imbalance, temporary, you know, hormonal surge, maybe a, you know, a synaptic misfire. But being here right now with you feels to me rather like a thin place. And so far as I know, this is a room I've never stepped into before. But it's now, for me, for the rest of my life, a special room. Because, you know, I had a chance to share this with you. But I do think, you know, thin places are there to be found. But I wonder if thin places, or there were a couple other metaphors in there like altar, but if thin places might not be something we can at least co-create. That they're not something we just have to find or move ourselves to, but we may in fact be able to roll up our sleeves in a sense, or better yet, open our hearts in a way that opens up thin places in unexpected places, you know, at the bedside, on the palliative care service, or in the labor and delivery room, or, you know, comforting somebody who's injured or dying in the field that you never expected to stumble across. But somehow you had or were blessed with the presence of mind to be able to set everything else aside and really be there, be fully present in that moment. That's a terrifying prospect, but also I think those constitute the most memorable and ultimately transformative moments in our lives. And implicit in that presentation is the notion that 4 years of study as a medical student might be rife with thin places, either waiting to be discovered or perhaps beckoning us to co-create, not just to treat this as a technical problem, a matter for informatics or biochemistry or clinical diagnosis, but as a human occasion, a really important moment in the life of one of our fellow human beings that deserves to be recognized and respected and savored in a certain sense. And I think those opportunities tend to pass many of us by. It's not that we say, should I go there? Not right now. It's that they never even emerge into our consciousness as possibilities. And we end up missing them. Yes, sir. Would you say your name?
Chris.
Chris.
Similar from Marion. Just kind of a quick question off that. I just want to hear your thoughts on, so finding a fit place. How would you go about finding like a fit place for you personally, and then co-creating one? How do you say you go about like co-creating a thin place? So like by a patient's bedside, how do you go about like making that into a thin place that maybe you can experience or potentially a patient, I guess?
Well, it's a great question. How can we find and co-create thin places? I would say one opportunity is with us right now today. Namely, there are a lot of physicians gathered who care about the well-being, the mental health, maybe the spiritual health, I don't know, of our colleagues. And there's somebody in this room right now that if you had a conversation with that person at lunch, it would change your life. I mean, is that one of the two people seated next to you, or the person in the row behind you, or somebody in this half of the room? You won't get to have all those conversations today at once. But there's somebody in this room right now that if not the same person for each of us, but there's at least one person for each of us, that if we could have a conversation with that person today at lunch, it would prove transformative, revelatory. It would reveal something and transform maybe our careers, maybe our lives. And we need to be open to those possibilities. Too many of us are walking around like this. I got a test at the end of March or the 1st of April or in June. And that's my life. That test is my life. That's not living. That's not life. Doesn't mean we should, studying, forget it. Done with that. I'm resetting my tuner to God. And I'll just commune with God all day long and ignore everything else. That's not what I'm saying. I mean, maybe it's no accident you're in medical school. Could it be that you're meant to be in medical school? Could it be that's your path to God, your walk with God, your opportunity to open up those possibilities to other people? I don't know if it is or not, but could it be? I think theoretically speaking, the answer is yes. But so many of us have our blinders on, there's a hint of a possibility here, but I can't redirect my gaze over there. They don't write multiple choice questions for standardized exams with one correct response and 4 distractors for that kind of thing. So I can't bother with them. I can't let that distract me, right? I got to stay focused on my goal. It doesn't have to be that way. 4 years of medical school, 3 to 7 years of residency, a year or 2 of fellowship, 5 to 7 years trying to get promoted to assistant professor, earning partnership, working your way up the ladder of the organization till you're secretary and treasurer and vice president, president. You don't have to put, the divine on hold, as though we could even do that. But you don't have to put the divine on hold for any period of time to follow your path. And my suggestion would be that all of us can be more present on the path, come more fully to life on the path, if we're open visually, orally, in our hearts. That was not a very helpful answer, but it's a challenge for today. In about an hour, actually less than an hour, could something amazing happen? The answer is yes. It is absolutely yes. The only real question is, will it happen? Are you prepared for the possibility that it will happen? That, what's prayer? Oh, that's easy. Please, God, let me score at least 250 on this exam. That's all I'm asking. I've been good. I've made some mistakes along the way, but by and large, my slate is clean. All I'm asking is for a score of at least 250. Please. 1.5 standard deviations above the mean. Is that too much to ask for a faithful person like me? Maybe that's what prayer is all about. Maybe. But maybe prayer is also about entering into the moment, being present in the moment, being alert and awake, compassionate and attuned enough to recognize what's beckoning us in the moment, where we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, who we should be striving to become. We can do that. But guess what? It's at least as hard as learning biochemistry or gross human anatomy or the hospital information system. It takes at least the same level of clarity of purpose, dedication, daily discipline to achieve it. And we need to remember that. But like everything in life that's really worth striving for, I think it's worth the effort. Yes, sir. Question in the back.
I'm Matt. You had talked about awareness, which is kind of like implies some sort of like afference or feeling. Could I ask you what, if you can describe something like that? Any like afference that you get during your awareness? Sensation? How do you know
Well,
it's in place?
if you really want to understand that, spend time with these paintings. Read Augustine of Hippo's Confessions, the first, in a way, autobiography in Western civilization. I don't have any like 3x5 card answer to that, but I feel like I've experienced it twice today. Once when I was describing the student who helped found firm who's no longer with us, and once when I was reading a particular paragraph of that text, I had a weird feeling. I mean, not like goose flesh, but I had the feeling that, I don't know how else to put it, but that something was speaking through me. I was listening to myself talk, or listening to something being said through me. That may sound like total baloney. This guy's delusional. Yeah. Is he still on faculty? He's still got hospital privileges and a license to practice? Get this corrected. Get this guy medicated fast before he hurts somebody. But, I'm just being honest with you. That's what it seemed like to me. And I've had that happen, at patients' bedsides or in clinic rooms or out in the field when somebody suffered a disaster. It just seems kind of like something else has, maybe the word enthusiasm. Are you enthusiastic? That's what you want your clinical evaluators to say when you're on rotations, right? So-and-so is an enthusiastic learner, an enthusiastic contributor to the work of the team and so forth. Enthusiasm. What does that mean? It's a Greek word. It means the exact same thing as the Latin word inspire or inspiration. Some of you remember firm means finding inspiration and resilience in medicine. What is enthusiasm? What is inspiration? In or en means in, I-N, but the spiritus or theos, the thusia part, means God. To be inspired is to have a spirit or the spirit moving within one. And you won't find that in Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine or Savaston's Principles of General Surgery. It won't be on your board, exams. Nobody ever talks about that. But there's at least a possibility that's what some of us are striving for or hoping for or praying for. And, maybe that pertains to you as well. The sooner we recognize that, the better each of us, our colleagues, our patients, the profession, and I think our communities will be, that we can act with something higher, more real, moving within us, moving us. And that's when you come most fully alive to life in medicine and as a human being. So I hope you're intrigued by this, that I conceive of this session not as the definitive concluding statement on the divine and medical practice, but really as, the first, and what I hope will be a series of conversations, or at least reflections. I may or may not participate subsequently in those conversations, but we need to have these kind of conversations from time to time. We need chances for this kind of reflection. And, I hope this has whetted your appetite, in a way, stimulated your enthusiasm to pursue this line of inquiry further in your own reflection and in conversation with the rest of us. I'm told we need to stop. So I'll hang around. I could talk all day about this, but we do have another session we need to go to. What can you tell us about that, Nathan?
Depends on what session you signed up
Okay.
for, breakout room, but
When do they need to be in the next?
I think 5 after or so.
So are we? Yeah, we're pretty good. That would give 10 or 15 minutes. If you're from Marion or otherwise not familiar with this campus, there are plenty of people who are, in our midst. So just ask somebody you don't recognize, are you from IU, or do you know how to get around, and they'll be happy to take you.
Thank you again for talking.
Wow, thanks a lot. That's a well-wrapped.
I didn't do that.
Hi.
My name is
How do you spell Aaron?
E-R-I.
Oh, good. It's easy.
Are you going to make that paper
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Send me an email. I can give you
Yeah.
a card and have you send me.
Sorry.
Where are you and what
I'm
stage are you at?
at Marion.
Cool. Oh,
So
great.
yeah, and I really appreciate it.
My nephew is in your class. His name's Luke. Gunderman. Yeah, it's a big class. What,
Yeah, it is a
162
big, yeah, it is a big class.
I can't
I'll
find
find
my
it
business
online.
card. That will be easy. I mean, it's a bizarre name, Richard Gunderman, so you'll find
I
it.
appreciate a lot of your hard work
Thanks.
and your gesture.
Thanks a lot.
I really appreciate it.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Hey. Sure. Yeah. Excellent. Great. No kidding. Wow. Thank you. Yeah, man. Open that door. Hey, how are you? Great. Thanks a lot for being here.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Okay.
I'm going to collect my stuff.
All right, so you should just be able to plug it in the flash drive once I figure this out. There we are.
I will drive it.
Okay.
And I will add it to the desktop.
There we